before we get started, like I said, I want to give you a little bit about who I am. I'm Beth Oyarzun. It's easier if you put a little apostrophe in your mind after the O to pronounce, so then it sounds just like it's spelled. And I'm a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Instructional and Educational Leadership, but I teach in the Instructional System Technology program. In that program, just highlighting here, we have a certificate that you could get in online teaching and learning, which is 5 courses for 15 credit hours. If any of you guys are interested or know anyone that's interested in that, please let us know. We also have certificates in other areas, but I thought that one was most appropriate for our topic today. Okay. So just to start off, it sounds like many of you have a great deal of experience in blended learning, but it's always nice to just start off with a definition. When we talk about blended learning, it's partly online, it is partly face-to-face, and that creates in the middle that blended learning experience. And that can be done in various ways. It can be mostly online, it can be mostly face-to-face. So there's a lot of how that blend happens that we're going to be talking about today and what some best practices might be. Oh, and I want to say before we get too much further, I'd like this to be a conversation, so if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to hit that hand button, and I will unmute your mic, and you can say your comment or question at any time. We don't need to wait till the end. Okay, so to start us off, I know this is a lot of text, so I'm going to stop talking and give you a minute to read it. So this is a scenario, and what I want you to think about as you're reading it is this a blended learning experience? So I'll give you a moment. Hopefully everybody's had a time to read this little scenario about Tracy, our teacher. And so in the interest of engaging the audience, I want you to decide whether that represented a blended learning experience or not. So I think that's about everybody. We have 60% that say no, that's 5. I think we have a couple more people that might answer. But it's interesting that some of you think it is and some of you think that it isn't. Does anybody want to share what their thoughts are on why or why not you think that's a blended learning experience? How about somebody that said it was? Why do you think that was a blended learning experience? Okay, Kim? Are you there, Kim?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Great.
So I guess just in my experience of teaching hybrid courses, well, what I call hybrid, same thing as blended, I guess, yeah. Would be that they actually have learning experiences that they do outside of the classroom and then bring those experiences back into the classroom. I think of like a flipped classroom type of scenario where this seems like they're doing it online, but they're doing it in the class. So it's a use of technology, but not necessarily blended from my perspective.
Okay. Thank you for that perspective, Kim. I think it's a good one. Anybody else on the other side that said it was a blended learning experience want to chime in? But yes, it doesn't necessarily, it is blending a face-to-face and online instruction, but it's more of a high-tech experience, not necessarily a blended learning experience. And I think what this scenario misses is that applied learning piece that it should be done in class, or active learning piece that should be in class, which really speaks to the engagement that we're talking about with this particular presentation. So thank you for participating in the poll. And move now to getting into some of the models. Now there's lots of different blended learning models, and if you start reading the research, you'll find other titles for things, but I'm focusing on ones, about 4 different ones today to talk about and how you can blend your face-to-face and online courses to engage students and help them learn more. These 2 are more involved with supplemental instruction. So a blended face-to-face driver is really a face-to-face class that then you use online instruction to supplement students who are either advanced or they need remediation. For example, if you have a student, a class that's a writing intensive course and the student needs supplemental writing instruction or has issues with their writing, you could use online instruction to help bring them up, to supplement that instruction and bring their writing to a place that's better and more equal to the rest of the class to help them proceed more quickly. The opposite is exactly true in the blended online driver. So this is an online course, which I believe someone mentioned that they're teaching online. So the course is delivered fully online, but then you could use face-to-face instruction or synchronous instruction to help supplement or differentiate instruction for individuals who either need remediation or advanced activities. So this helps individualize instruction for those who may need that little extra boost or need to take the instruction a step further. Okay. And in order to use either one of those strategies, you can identify the students who need that supplemental instruction or that advanced instruction, and then you choose the appropriate supplemental instruction and the tool. You need to be familiar with that instruction and tool, and then provide or supervise students and offer assistance. So for those, there's lots of different tools that you could use. Notice I use strategies before I talk about tools, because I think the strategies are important in why you're using it versus what tools you are using. Okay. So these are the different tools that you could use for either the face-to-face or online learning. So the online learning resources would be for the supplemental instructions for students in face-to-face or online classes. There's Khan Academy, there's publisher materials that could be used. Lynda, which we don't have at UNCC, but I looked and you have access to it through like the libraries. Some public libraries you can get access to Lynda through it. And then there's MOOCs, which is massively open online courses through edX and Coursera. Also, our library has some nice instructions in the UNCC library. I didn't put it there, but they have in the Writing Center here on campus for particular assistance. For face-to-face or synchronous learning resources, if you were supporting those online students, you could use WebEx or Google Hangouts. You could have them come to your office to meet or another meeting location. Actually, for my online students, I teach online as well. I offer to meet them at either a coffee shop or their place of work, because many of mine are master's students that are working. So I'll go to their school or their work and visit them to talk about whatever issues they're having with the course or whatever remediation or additional instruction they may need. Does anybody have a thought on this type of blending and how it could be used or how you may use it in your courses before we move on to the next model? Sandy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I teach a large lecture class, and this is the first semester that I've taught it. It's got about 150 students in it. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have a TA that helps with supplemental instruction outside of the classroom, but this might be a way to lighten the load of a TA so that they could spend time in other areas helping the professor.
Great, and you could have the TA follow up on some of these, like if you gave some Khan Academy resources or an edX course for a student to take, maybe the TA could then follow up with the student to make sure they took it and if they had any questions. A lot of those MOOCs give certificates and things, or they could print the checklist that they completed. That's a great example. Any others? I use Google Hangouts too for my synchronous meetings. It's nice that it's embedded directly in Gmail. So I tell students if they see me logged into Google Hangouts that we could have an instant message chat to answer questions, or if they want to have a call, it's much like WebEx. You can do a video call within Hangouts and have a conversation that way too. Okay. Moving on, I think somebody mentioned this in the introduction, that flipped classroom is another model that's used and it's very popular these days. This is where you reverse the traditional model, where students, in traditional classes, they have their lecture in class and then they do the homework or the application activities outside of class. Flipping that means they have their lecture or learning activities at home, and then they come to class to do that engagement activity. And this is the part that I feel like the scenario was missing a little bit. So if we're looking at how to do a flipped classroom, we're going to look at how to do the lecture videos, and then all these different active learning or class activities that you could do within the class. So to record lecture videos, we always recommend that you plan and script it. Because of the closed captioning, if you have a script, it's easier to put the closed captions in at the end. You need to record, and there's help here on campus if you need help doing that. There's several resources here on campus to help you do that. Then edit, and then it's always nice to include assessment. I think the biggest complaint people get with implementing a flipped classroom is that students then don't prepare. And if they don't watch the video or do the learning activities at home prior to class, then they have a hard time doing the application activity within the class. So including a self-check quiz or some sort of assessment to ensure that they completed the lectures before they come to class can be helpful. Also, that data can give you information to help you plan the activity. So if they're having trouble with a particular concept, you can see from the quiz what concept that might be, and then you could take an application activity a little deeper in the following class. It can also help you plan, including that assessment. So within the class activities, these are just some suggestions here. Of course, there's others that you could do. It's not an exhaustive list, but it should be active learning, some sort of peer instruction where they are working together, or collaborative learning where they're working together to build something, problem-based learning where they're giving them a problem and they're trying to solve it during the class, or they're having a discussion or a debate about a particular topic within your curriculum. So with the flipped classroom, is anybody using this or have an example, particularly of the class activity where it's the application? Bobby.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I mentioned earlier that I help support in my department a blended learning model. In particular, our elementary Spanish program here at UC Charlotte more than 10 years ago underwent a large course redesign, and that redesign resulted in what is essentially a flipped model whereby students only meet once a week for 75 minutes with their instructor, and outside of class we use publisher-created materials that we choose and organize students complete so that outside of class they devote their time to learning vocabulary and grammar, and then class time is devoted to the application. So students interact with one another with various activities, pairs, group work, and the instructor does little, if any, grammar and vocabulary instruction. Now, that's the model, but the reality is, unfortunately, many of our students don't assume the onus of learning, and they don't come prepared always. And even those who have done the homework assignments, unfortunately, they just do them and check them to get them done, and they don't really understand, unfortunately, the relationship between what's happening outside of class and inside of class. So that's kind of where we're struggling today, is to make greater connections between that outside class piece and then what happens in class.
Do you have an assessment in place to ensure that they've done the activities, like some sort of quiz or some sort of
absolutely.
practice assignment?
They get grades for those, and then there are built-in formative and summative assessments throughout the course. So they're being graded, and they have the opportunity to do the activities as many times as they want. So they could technically get a 100 on their homework assignment. The reality is, when we drill down and look at the data that the platform provides, maybe 30 to 35% actually will complete an activity more than once to improve their score.
Interesting. So do you have any ideas about a solution or what you think is not working?
Yeah, well, a big part of it is, again, you know, this is an introductory course. So we're asking a lot of students to put them in this position to assume so much responsibility. But I think that there need to be additional support. We provide a dedicated tutor, but students look at tutoring as kind of a negative rather than a positive. So many of them don't come to this free tutoring that's offered, you know, every day of the week from 8 until 5. The other piece is financial. You know, if we could hire someone who maybe once a week could give an additional like review course, I think that would be helpful too. But then the third piece is just kind of programmatically looking at what are the supports that are needed to ensure more of a learner or learning pathway that can articulate for the student, this is how what you're doing outside of class relates to what happens during class. So I feel like we make a lot of assumptions that our students are making these connections between the virtual work and the face-to-face.
Right. Thank you for your comments. And yeah, I think implementing any new strategy comes with its, you know, headaches and learning lessons along the way. And that's interesting to hear programmatically what the disconnects are. And I think you're on the right path to solving them. And maybe it comes to having, you know, some instruction at the beginning of the class to explain, you know, this is what you learned from the online activities, and this is what we're going to be doing in class today with that material. Do you think that would help?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think that there are the assumptions that we make. I think students need a little more scaffolding and support to push them into the metacognitive realm, where they're thinking a little bit more about how everything works together. I teach a completely online class, and I do that for my online learners. You know, I make no assumptions, and I use a very friendly tone, and so that they always feel the presence of someone.
And I think that is important in the flipped classroom as well, that they need that support and the facilitation, because the facilitation strategy and the scaffolding that you mentioned should be part of that in-class activity, I would think. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Great points. Thank you for bringing them up. Any other questions or thoughts? And I have the tools over here on the left if you're thinking about recording. Screencast-O-Matic is a free tool that you can use to do screencasts. Camtasia, I think UNCC has a site license for, you can use to record. You can upload videos to Canvas or to YouTube and then put them in Canvas. And then it's Kaltura within Canvas too, I think, that you can use to record and just post it directly there. And students could use those too. Any other thoughts or examples, particularly of the in-class activity? I didn't mean to go that far. Sorry. Where were we? Okay. Great. And we could talk more about this when we get to the end too. The next one I'm going to talk about is rotation models. And this is more for classes that meet regularly, but you want to blend within the classroom. This could be the large lecture that several of you mentioned. And there's several different rotation models. Station rotation, and you hear a lot about these, particularly in the K-12 environment, but that doesn't mean they couldn't apply to the college level. Station rotation is where you split the class into stations, and they have various things to do at each one. The instructor is doing small group lecture or instruction in one station. The other station could be online learning, where they're all on a computer doing an activity. Another station could be some collaborative activity or a makerspace where they're building something. The other one, and you can have as many or few stations as you need, and the idea would be students would rotate through during class time. A lab rotation is similar, except you'd have 2 classrooms. You maybe have a computer lab where they do online work, and then you have your face-to-face class where they do more of that application work. So you could still split the class into 2 groups, and they're just going to 2 different locations. If you have that TA working in a class, this can be helpful for these types of models. And then there's the individual rotation where you have all these stations or labs set up, but you don't group the students and have them move around together. You just sort of let them go, and they could go to any station for a certain amount of time, and then you cut the time, and then they could go to a different station individually. So it works a similar way. So this is a drawing of what that might look like. This is a 4-station example. But like I said, you could have, as few or as many as you want. But the idea is that these, the small group and the collaborative, again, would be that deeper sort of application activity. And then the small group and the online may be the grammar, vocabulary, or where you're just helping them answer questions from what they did from that online activity. Or, Bobby, that could be the, where they've done the online learning, now you're prepping them for the small group work to the collaborative project. You're doing that remediation or that support there, maybe in the small group. So with this in mind, I want to have a brainstorm and share. So we looked at several different models and talked about several different ways that you can blend online versus face-to-face instruction. So I want you to think about your class and your instruction and think if there's any of these types of things that you can do to change or add to what you're doing now. And then share that idea. Oh, there's Kai. The beeping scares me a little bit. Kai.
Right, it sounds like an alarm. Where am I supposed to be? So one of the things I'd like to explore with my online-only classes would be a way, I guess I'm trying to figure out how to structure it either as optional or, not extra credit, but, for people who wanted to connect visually, maybe doing some small group conversations or, offer like office hours or something so that there's a little bit of structure to it. But I guess what I'm trying to figure out is would I need to record those for the benefit of everybody since it's online only, or just offer them as optional kind of drop-in office hours, or create a requirement that at least once in the semester you check in one of these. So.
I just read an article on something similar to this where they're using the idea of meetups. I don't know if you know about that.
Okay.
I think that's done a lot professionally where people, around a certain topic, organize an optional meetup, and then you come and you discuss that topic at a coffee shop or this or that. I've heard of some people using that in blended learning as a way for students to then optionally get together and talk about a topic of interest from the course. And you could use it that way, and so it's more social, not necessarily work. And then it's kind of optional, and I think that would get you out of having to record it as well for the benefit of the whole class. So, and then maybe if you had, 5 or 6 meetups for the course, and then say, go to at least one.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and it can be virtual or, face-to-face meetups. that you could organize.
Yeah, so I guess even in my blended courses, the weeks, what I tend to do is we meet in class every other week, and then the online course, or the online weeks, we have, you know, different video discussions, things online. But I wonder if sometimes during those online weeks, if I reserved some of our regular class time for meetups a few times in the semester. Okay, great.
Again, I don't know that that gets past the issue that Bobby was talking about, whether they're not really motivated. So you may have to put a requirement in there. You know, if it's not, grad students are a little bit different than undergrad in that. So.
Correct, yeah. So if I find out from them some of the topics they're really interested in, yeah, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other brainstorm ideas of something that you might could use or incorporate? Another minute. Well, while you're thinking, if you want to share, please do so. But while you're thinking, we're going to move on to a couple of additional resources that I think are particularly wonderful, especially for planning purposes if you're doing any blended learning. This is a blended learning toolkit from the University of Central Florida. It's probably the most comprehensive one that I've seen that gives you all kinds of articles and effective practices and evaluation resources, research in blended learning if you want to look, and it gives you all kinds of toolkits too of activities you could use and projects. So I think this is a nice comprehensive site if you want to dig in and get some specific strategies to use within your courses. They even have model courses here as well. The other one, you don't have access to the book, but you can purchase the book, but they do have these handouts from this blended course design workbook that are available online that are very nice as well. So all of these handouts are in PDF form, and it can just really help you with thinking through your planning of how you want to blend and what you want to do with your blended activities. So each of these is printable, so you answer the questions, you make comments about your course, and then it helps you go through and design some blended learning activities. So all of them from each chapter are in PDF format. Here's a weekly course mapping PDF that you could use. So here's my objectives. My online, I'm going to do this. These are my assessments. This is what I'm going to do face-to-face. So these are just helpful planning documents. And you could also buy the book if you were interested that goes along with it. Another resource that wasn't mentioned for the online, this is a growing thing in online learning and blended learning, which is open educational resources. And this is OER Commons. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but you can access all kinds of resources and courses, and either, depending on who uploaded it, you can then customize it to then add to your Canvas course or to assign to a student if needed be. So that's an interesting resource to go through. And then this is a book on blended learning, particularly for higher education, that has some of these frameworks, principles, and guidelines that are mentioned here, but it could be a good resource for your blended learning planning as well. Has anybody else had a thought or an idea, something you can use? And if there's no other questions or comments, that was all that I had. But thank you for coming, and I really appreciate the interactiveness of this group, and I hope you got at least one thing that you can use.